Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is an analysis of the fall of the House of Usher by yours truly, Jimmy. First, some quotes from the story for your consideration before I begin my interpretation. Okay. The disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skills of her physicians. We want to remember that the Lady Madeline suffered from a gradual wasting away, cataleptical, etc. So just remember that her brother told me at night with inexpressible agitation when he first meets Roderick, prostrating power of the destroyer. Those are interesting words there. One evening, he informed the narrator abruptly the Lady Madeline was no more. And he wants to preserve her, of course, for a fortnight. He doesn't want to take her outside to the burial grounds, but he wants to preserve her be previous to its final interment. Why? Well, that's one of the things we're going to talk about. The worldly reason is assigned to the single which I had not failed to disprove. The brother had led to his resolution. Why he wants to do this? So he told me, by consideration of the unusual character of the malady that of the deceased, Madeline. He inquires of Madeline, remote, exposed, I will not deny. Then when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person I met on the staircase, that was the doctor, on the day of my arrival, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as best. So the doctors were apparently responsible for telling Roderick, don't put Madeline in the ground yet, put her temporarily some. Why? Well, because of the nature of her malady, which is cataleptical, right? She may not be dead. Think about that. So at the request of Usher, I helped him do this, and in the vault lying at great depth beneath the portion of the building in which my own sleeping apartment. So they put her in a vault way down below, and you know the description of the vault, right? It's a dungeon keep. It's laced, it's laced with copper because maybe it was an ammunition shed or powder was stored there. Don't forget how the house ends. It kind of blows up or whatever. Maybe there was some powder left over. We don't know. It's not important to know. All it's important to know is that the house does, in fact, fall into the tarn. In any case, what's also important is that the narrator's bedroom is right above. So he turns aside the yet unscrewed lid. They look at her. That's when he finds out that they were twins. They were twins. And blah, 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 the mockery. So they see a mockery, faint blush in the bosom and face, and she's got a lingering smile. So there's a faint blush, which means it's not white. Like if you've ever seen a dead person, they are actually white, right? They're dead. There's no color. But in Madeline's case, there's a faint blush. Okay, bending closely. I drank the words of his, and that's at the end when he tells her this is the ending of the story where he's telling the narrator she's outside the door. Very powerful piece of evidence because, I've heard it for days. He's heard her trying to get out of the vault for days. Remember that. Okay. So now some examples of what other, before I go into Jimmy's interpretation, I want to read, because you can Google House of Usher interpretations analysis, and you'll read all sorts of stuff. I want to say garbage, but I'll say stuff. I pulled up a few examples. Others say Poe is creating in this story his connection of a special affinity between a brother and his twin sister. I don't know about that. I don't know if this was a story about affinity between a brother and sister. It is almost as if Poe were inventing ESP. I've been around literature for a long time. I learned the wrong way, perhaps, but really the right way. Don't judge by what other critics say or what other people say. Judge by your own experience with the story. And that's what I encourage all of you to do. When you listen to Jimmy's interpretation, don't just listen to Jimmy. Do your own interpretation by going back, rereading, taking notes. I don't know anything in here about ESP going on. I never sensed it. I never saw evidence of it. And this critic says for this accounts for the fact Roderick had heard Barry Lady struggling within her coffin in her change for over 3 days before the narrator hears her while he's reading, Sir Lancelot the Tryst, right? Well, I say, well, then why didn't he do something about it? If he heard it, why didn't Roderick do anything about it? First person narrator is important. We're going to cover that in a minute. This is the narrator telling us what he observed, what Usher said to him, and we have to believe or not believe the narrator. So the narrator is telling us that Roderick blurted out that he had heard her trying to get out since the time they put her in the vault. Well, if that's true, then why didn't Roderick do something about it? Or what do you think was bothering the narrator to keep him up that night? Did he hear it too? Because don't forget, his bedroom was right above the vault. And, if she was trying to get out for several days and finally managing to get out the day of the ending of the story, certainly the narrator should have heard something, or maybe he did hear something too, but who knows? It's an old house. Old houses creak. They have strange noises. Another critic said that the story raises many questions tied to gender issues. Is Madeline Roderick's female double or doppelganger? Doppelganger. We'll find, you know what that is, right? Doppelganger. We'll figure out what that is. It's a double, right? If, as many critics suggest, Roderick is Poe's self-portrait. BS. Anyway, before I tell you why it's BS, then do Madeline and Roderick represent the feminine and masculine sides of the author? Is incest at the core of Roderick? Where the heck do these interpretations come from? There is absolutely no evidence, none, zero, of incest. Doppelganger isn't a double of a living person. It's your double, right? Doppelganger. It's you. Someone. God, this looks like me. And this guy saying is Madeline Roderick's doppelganger. No, it's his sister. It's his twin sister. Of course they look alike. So where the hell did that? And now having read the story, what you should think about critics, right? I want to start asking where incest came from. But as I mentioned in other analysis, people often see what they want to see and what they themselves really are, but they cannot admit. Something is wrong with the person who wrote this analysis. I'm just telling you. By the way, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, if you think there's incest going on, you send me an email and point to it. I love education. I love being overruled. Another one says, but Madeline is, if you like, a signifier without a signified. Sorry. What does that mean? She is a symbol with no code. She represents a secret. But what that secret is, an unseemly relationship between her and her brother, or some dark secret from the family's past, does remain hidden. The secret, as it were, remains a secret even when it is revealed. What are you talking about? What does it mean to be a signifier? What does she represent? Where did this notion come from? Where did the notion that she represents a secret? She's his sister who's suffering, right? She's got a disease. There's a doctor involved. Believing people like this will take you away from the huge story, and it will be a huge mistake in your thorough understanding and appreciation. Remember, we're reading classics to not only understand, but to appreciate it. This language is beautiful. Poe's language is beautiful. This is beautifully written. But he's not the narrator. Poe is not the narrator. It's a third person. It's a first person narrator. Pardon me. Another one. The Fall of the House of Usher can also be analyzed as a deeply telling autobiographical portrait in which Roderick Usher represents Poe himself. I want to swear I do, but I'm going to control myself. Roderick Usher is a poet and an artist, well read. Okay, great. So is a lot of people. Sensitive, maybe overly sensitive. Many critics have interpreted this as a story. They always use that other many critics, many critics. It's like my sources. It's like when you're reading a Wall Street Journal article. So my sources, or we have sources, but they never name the sources, right? Who are these critics? As part of an autobiographical portrait, as we should be wary perhaps of speculating too much about any parallels. You think? You shouldn't even mention that it could be Poe. There's the many critics again. Here's another one. The Netflix show, The Fall of the House of Usher, changed Madeline's ending from Edgar Allan Poe's story, providing a gentler nature to her demise. A gentler nature to her death, right? In Netflix show is caused by her brother who poisons her drink. So that's a little gentler than burying her alive, right? And takes out her eyes, giving her what believes to be a proper passing. I don't know what to tell you. I could, if you want to look up Netflix and try to watch it, I watched the first part, and they've got brothers and sisters and all sorts of crap. Two adjectives in this line of characterize the tone and nature of the House of Usher: dreary and melancholy. So they're saying that this critic says two adjectives, describe the nature. The adjective dreary refers to something which has listlessness and discouragement. Good for you, you looked it up. And which lacks anything to give cheer or comfort. The adjective melancholy refers to something which has an inclination to sadness, mournfulness, gloominess. That the road to House of Usher and the house itself are introduced in a dreary and melancholy, it firmly establishes the tone of this Gothic tale by establishing a lonely, sad environment in which Usher lives. Sorry. Melancholy is used only twice, the word, in this story. Twice. Dreary is used only once. Now, I told you in my analysis, in the parts analysis, the first thing I told you in the first part, the narrator loves adjectives. He uses triplicates. He uses sometimes four adjectives to describe a single noun. And there's nothing wrong with adjectives. And if you're going to say something like this, the adjectives that characterize the tone of this story, you should probably start counting the adjectives and how many times they are used, which is not difficult these days. Just grab the story and start counting. For example, shudder and dark are used 6 times each. Shudder. The narrator shudders a lot. Roderick shudders a lot. Dark. Dark is used 6 times. Gloom, terror, 7 times each. Gloom, terror. Those are adjectives, right? Gloom, terror, right? There's over 7,000 words in the whole story, but I don't think 2 words, dreary and melancholy, really characterize the tone. This is if you had to roll it up in one word, it's terror, it's horror, maybe it's a word that is not even written in here. Fear. There's a lot of fear in this story. He tries to generate fear. All right. Lady Madeline's mysterious illness is characterized as a settled apathy, wasting away of the person, cataleptical character. In other words, she is suffering from a condition similar to catalepsy. Catalepsy is a nervous condition combined with epilepsy. These are all serious conditions, right? It's a loss of sensation, consciousness associated with the rigidity of body. In other words, catalepsy is a condition that makes the sufferers look corpse-like. They look like a corpse. And this could be interpreted as a hint that she was not dead, but in fact buried alive. In fact, it is. In fact, the doctors warned Roderick, don't put her in the ground, put her in a temporarily interment, which he did. So as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that she was indeed buried. She was buried alive. She was put in that vault alive because she comes back, according to the narrator. Now, before we conclude that, we're going to have to talk a little bit about Mr. Narrator. But before we do that, Roderick hears noises at night, but is not sure if they're real or figments of his imagination, or does he? I'm going to give you a lot of questions in this interpretation. I'm going to try to answer some of them. I'm not going to answer all of them because you yourself have to interpret it. Does he hear these things, or is the narrator saying he's reporting that he heard these things? The narrator heard these things. On the last day, he's admitting that he heard them. In the second to last paragraph, when Madeline appears before Roderick, she's described as an enshrouded figure with blood and white robe. She's obviously got out of the coffin. We don't know how she did it, right? We never know how, but she did get out of it. She got out of it. She got out of the vault, and she came upstairs and fell on her brother. If you screw down the lid and seal the coffin, how does a weak person like Madeline get out? That's a good question. She was weak, right? She was, very, very weak. The narrator saw her only once, but she got out. Was she really weak, or was that just what the narrator perceived as weakness? One of the answers to this is adrenaline. If you know anything about adrenaline, adrenaline causes your blood vessels to send more blood to your brain and muscles. You've heard of people doing extraordinary things when adrenaline rush hits them. I got an adrenaline rush. Athletes sometimes get an adrenaline rush, right? Adrenaline increases everything. Blood pressure, your brain is more alert, sugar levels increase your energy, you get more energy. Well, that's one. If she woke up in the tomb and she realizes she's sealed in a coffin, I would respectfully suggest she's going to get some adrenaline going in that shattered body of hers, right? That might give her the power to rip through, open that coffin. Anyway, analysis, it takes place with the evidence in the story. So I'm not going to presume to interpret all of this for you. But I'm interested in, when I analyze stories, staying in the story and looking for motivations. So you can read Fall of the House of Usher on many levels, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't want to deter you from your enjoyment, appreciation, understanding of the story by imposing my analysis on your understanding and appreciation. So you can read it as a horror story. This is a classic. It is the classic Gothic horror story. You hear the term Gothic. We're going to read some other Gothic stories. It's a venue. It's a type of literature. Gothic stories, eerie castles, right? Ghosts, whatever. A Christmas Carol is kind of a Gothic Christmas tale. Three Ghosts Visit, right? Charles Dickens. It's kind of like Gothic. There's gargoyles and towers and, it's eerie, right? So you can read this simply as a horror story. Buried alive, Madeline comes up, kills her brother. You can read it as a descent into mental illness or mental illness, period. Roderick clearly suffers from a mental disorder. Pardon me. Then it's a very sad story. Not a horror story, but it's a sad story. The guy's nuts. It's sad. Right? You can read it as a crime story. What do you mean, Jimmy? Crime? The heck? Sealing Madeline up in the tomb and knowing she has that disease is a crime. Wouldn't you agree with that? If he knows she's got the disease and he seals her in that tomb, he knows he's killing her. Why? What is the motive? Oh, you're just whistling Dixie. Well, let's find out. So the real questions we want to talk about are motivation of the characters. So here are some clues, starting with the parentheses in the story. The narrator uses a lot, 22 times, parentheses. I explained to you in all of my analysis for any book, story, drama that I'm going to analyze, parentheses punctuation itself is very important to your reading voice. When a narrator in the first person or third person uses parentheses, these are kind of like sidebars. These are little notes. If you take the parentheses out and what's between the parentheses, if you take it out of the sentence makes perfect sense. That's the beauty of a parentheses, right? That's the definition. You can take it out, it still makes sense. So why is it in there? It's in there as a kind of a sidebar to tell you what the narrator of the story is thinking. So I put these parentheses in here, and I'm not going to go through every one. I'll just show you. By the way, if you want a PDF of this file, this Word document, I'll be happy to send it to you. Just email Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. So the first parentheses His voice varied rapidly from a tremendous indecision when the animal spirits seem utterly in abeyance to the species of energetic. He's talking about Roderick, right? When the animal spirits seem utterly in abeyance, not there. With the bitterness which I will never forget, would leave him, the hopeless and the frail. So he puts those, him, the hopeless and the frail. He has sympathy for the narrator, but remember this. The first person narrator and the third person narrator are talking to us. They're talking to us, the readers, directly from first person inside the story, third person, the omniscient. We're going to cover that. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for so she was called. For so she was called. He learns her name that way. As her brother told me at the night with an inexpressible agitation, right? She succumbed to the prostrating power. That's when she dies. For as her brother told me at night with inexpressible agitation. Inexpressible agitation means what? Extreme nervousness. Right? On the closing of the evening of my arrival at the house, Madeline succumbed to the prostrating power of the destroyer, according to Roderick, and that's why the narrator never sees her anymore. She's confined to her room. He looks at paintings, vivid as their images now are before me. He can see the images before him as they are now. What is that now? Now is when he's telling us the story. So everything he's told us in this story from the time he arrives to the time he leaves has happened already. It's in the past. As vivid as their images now are before me. Now. Did he take the paintings with him? I don't think so. But he can see the images. They're vivid. It must have been pretty good. In their notes as well as in the words of what, for he not unfrequently accompanied himself with rhymed verbal improvisations. So when Roderick would talk or recite, he would, use, because he can't stand music except for strings, right? Okay, roundabout a throne. This is a name used twice in the poem. Remember the definitions. I'm not going to go through all these things. As I have previously hinted, for other men have thought this. Go back and reread these parentheses. And here I jumped as he spoke, blah, 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 right? There's a lot of parentheses, and they all mean something. They all mean, and which had been so long unopened, are taught, this is a whole big parentheses when they take Madeline to the ball. The hypochondriac might find relief, for the history of mental disorder is full of similar anomalies. He knows Roderick is suffering from or he's telling us he does, for the history of mental disorder. How does he know? Is he a doctor? I don't know. Okay. I did actually hear, although from what direction, those are when he's hearing the noises. So what do these comments in parentheses tell us? Well, it enhances his narration, but it also, in my mind, puts doubt in my mind about what this guy, why is this narrator telling us this story? Let me touch on first and third person narration again. I talk about this a lot in my analysis. I want to keep talking about it because it's very important. Who tells the story is the single most important consideration in your analysis of the story. And it's not the writer, unless he's writing an autobiography, right? The third person narrator always has to be believed. You cannot doubt what the third person narrator, if he's outside the story, he's what they call an omniscient narrator. He's godlike. He never lies. He never overstates anything. And if you don't believe what he's saying, none of the rest of the story will make sense. I'm going to show you that in a minute. Okay? So first person narrators are in the story. And so they're the same. They have the same flaws as you and I. They could be lying. Who knows? But they're inside the story. They both talk to us, but one is talking from inside. The other one is talking from outside. This is so important to your interpretation of this story because in the Fall of the House of Usher, the narrator is inside the story. Inside the story. Right? So they're telling us a story. The only difference is that one is in, one is out. So imagine for a moment the opening of the story. This is the original opening right here. So during the whole of adulthood, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singular dreary tract of country. Remember, we don't ever know where this takes place. And he found himself as the shades of evening drawn in view of the Melchites. I know not how it was, but the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable for the feeling those are blah, blah, blah. Okay. If you were to write that in third person, it would completely change the tone and your interpretation of the story. Well, Jimmy, what are you saying here? Who makes the final decision how to tell the story? Well, of course, the writer does. Of course, Edgar Allan Poe made the decision. He wrote the story, right? The narrator didn't write the story. Poe did. Which is why you have to consider the story itself. The writer's choice of narrators means something, just like the first sentence does, just like the first words do. He didn't just accidentally choose to write in the first person. This was intentional. He did it for a reason. And it's up to us as readers, just like in life. Let me ask you something, ladies and gentlemen. Do you believe everything everybody tells you? Do you really? If you are, get off. No, I'm kidding. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. People don't always tell the truth, do they? The only truth that I know of is the third person narrator in a story, because you got to believe him, otherwise the story don't make any sense. During the whole of a dull and dark and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, he had been passing alone on horseback. You see how that one word, that one pronoun, that one word changes everything. He had been passing alone on horseback, and at length found himself as the sage in front of the House of Usher. He knew not how it was, but on first glimpse, a sense of insufferable pervaded his spirit. He says insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved. You won't even need, he says. It's insufferable because the feeling was unrelieved. You can rewrite it. But Poe chose first person for a reason. So let's stick with the first person. Do you see how it changes the story? It's the same story, but it's very different. Therefore, in any story, the first decision you have to make is if this narrator is reliable. Never forget that. In a first-person narrated story, and you've seen examples of this, for example, Travel is So Broadening, that's a first-person narrator we covered. Do you believe that Mr. Schmaltz is reliable? Of course. He is and he isn't. He's a liar. Anyway, is this narrator reliable? That's the first decision. And you can track reliability through understanding the motives of the narrator and telling us what he chooses to tell us. Think about this. The narrator is telling us whatever he wants to tell us. Whatever he wants to tell us. He's got an open palette of words to paint the picture. And he chooses to tell us the way he tells it, how he tells it, what he tells us, because he's the narrator in the story. And I'm going to give you an example. This passage here talks about the letter that arrived that brought him to the House of Usher. A letter lately reached me, a letter from him, right? Which admitted of no other personal reply. Admitted no other than a personal reply. In other words, when that letter showed up and reached him in a distant part of the country, does that mean he was not at home? How did Usher get this letter to him? But in any case, he got the letter. But he could not write a letter back. He had to go there immediately, a personal reply. The manuscript gave evidence of a nervous agitation. Now, I can tell you that the first-person narrator, knowing that he's in the story and knowing what I just told you, has a choice. He could show us the letter. He could produce the letter. But he doesn't. He tells us that the manuscript gave evidence of nervous. The writer, who we know is Usher, spoke of acute bodily illness, a mental disorder, blah, 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 blah. It was in the manner which all of this and much more was said. Much more. Never tells us what the much more is. The apparent heart that went with his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation. I obeyed forthwith. I obeyed, right? From what I still consider a very singular summons. It was a summons. And then he talks about the background. They were intimate associates, yet I really knew very little of my friend. How can you be intimate and know very little about somebody? Can you be? Maybe. His reserve had always been excessive, habitual. I was aware of his very ancient family. Time out of mind for peculiar sensibility, blah, 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 and many works of art, deeds of charity. He knew he comes from a long line of people, right? Charitable people, an ancient family, rich people, passionate about intricacy, blah, 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 recognizable beauties of musical science, And he had learned, too, very remarkable fact that the stem of the race, right, produced no branches. In other words, there's no apparent heirs to the fortune. So first of all, if you got a letter like this, and again, we don't know the contents except what the narrator said, would you drop everything and go over there? And if you did like the narrator, why would you do that? Why would you drop everything and go there? That's the question you got to ask yourself. Why do you think he went there? What about this? When he's there and he's walking around the house, he's going through all the ceilings, the tapestries, the floors, the suits of armor. I had been accustomed from my infancy to this. Did the narrator grow up in a house like this with armor, suits of armor? I never saw anything like that except in ancient castles. These were familiar to him and yet unfamiliar. In any case, he gazed with feeling and half pity, and he says, no man has been altered like the one I saw in front of me. Did you read this description with me? Cadaverousness of complexion, an eye large, liquid, and luminous. You know what luminous is, right? It's glowing. Lips thin and pallid, beautiful curve, no Hebrew model, nostrils, blah, 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 blah. If you met a guy like this, would you stay? If this is a guy you knew when you were young and you came and you saw a guy like this before you, would you stay? The narrator, I doubted to whom I spoke. He doubts to who he's talking to. Maybe it's not Usher. Well, of course it is. Throughout the whole story, the narrator comes to a point of unspoken motivation. I don't know why I did this. I don't know why I felt this. I don't know why. I don't know why. So there's evidence here in everything we've been talking about that Usher was a wealthy guy. And the death of Madeline also eliminates any possible heir to the Usher fortune. I'm not, okay, Jimmy, are you saying that he went there because Usher was rich and he wanted to? I'm saying, yes, that this narrator went over there after he got this letter because he knew Usher. He went to school with Usher. He knows Usher's a rich guy, comes from a long line of rich guys, right? And he's just going over, well, let's see what Mr. Usher's up to. That's what I'm saying. He's nervous, he's agitated, he's ill. Maybe I can get something. Well, there's no evidence of that. Well, sure, I explained it to you. Would you, if you got a letter like that, would you drop everything and go? Why would you? And when you got there and you saw a guy like this before you, and you doubted it's the same guy, why would you stay? I don't want to rain on any Gothic parade. And I'm not, don't get me wrong. You can still read this as a great horror. It is a great horror story. It's a great story. It's a horror story. It's about mental illness. It's a great story. That's what makes it classic. It's language charged with meaning. But I have yet to read an analysis like I'm giving you that the narrator has selfish motives for going over there to see what Usher's not only got, but maybe he can, who knows? So I'm not raining on your Gothic parade, but this is a story about the narrator who believes he might be able to gain something from his rich friend. It's a good story. The way he buried Madeline is another tell. If temporary, why did they seal the tomb? Why did they screw down that lid? Note the parentheses here. The brother had been led to his resolution, so he told me. So he told me. The narrator's not taking responsibility for screwing down the lid. So he told me. By consideration of the unusual character of the melody of disease. The doctors told him, don't put her in the ground yet. Put her temporarily. The interpretation of that is why? Well, from her illness, she may not be dead. And she wasn't. So why did they screw down the lid? Why was that lid screwed down? I'm just asking. Right? I'm just asking. I mean, can you prove it one way or the other, Jimmy? Well, I think you can. Because there's no reason, if you're putting her temporarily in a vault below, right, before you put her in the ground, and the doctor says she may not be dead, so why would you screw down the lid unless you want to kill her? Just saying. Other questions. Why did Roderick write to the narrator after all these years? Why did he want that narrator? I don't know. I can speculate. If the narrator grew up around stuff like that and he did know him, and he maybe, I don't know. The narrator sees Madeline once, but never again until he helps Usher carry her to the vault. Why didn't he ask to see more? Why didn't he ask more about her? They never talked about her. Just go back to the book. They never brought up her name again until she died. Did Roderick know he was burying his sister alive? That's up for you to decide. Roderick admits he's been hearing noises after putting her in the vault, but didn't do it. He didn't do anything. Didn't do anything about it. Why? Why didn't he do anything about it? Why didn't he go down there, unscrew the lid, say, are you still there? He didn't do anything. He heard it. Well, maybe it was my excessive nervousness. That's BS. He heard it. And so did the narrator. The narrator's room was above where they placed Madeline. He surely heard something if Roderick did in another part of the house. He's right above the vault. But he didn't do anything about it. He didn't ask Roderick about it. And then look at this. It doesn't take long for the narrator to leave after Madeline falls and kills Roderick died of fright. That's my opinion. And the whole house comes down. Yeah. The narrator doesn't wait. He leaves aghast. He runs out. That's it. I'm done. These people are nuts. Why didn't he leave sooner? In other words, why was he hanging around Usher for so long? Well, Jimmy, you're missing the point. He was there to comfort him. He was there to comfort Usher. That's why Usher needed him. Really? You believe that? The beauty of a classic like this is that you can read. You can read this on many levels. And over and over and over, and you'll always find more things. It's a beautiful written story. Narrated stories. I love this story. That's why I read it to you. And I hope you enjoyed my analysis. Well, Jimmy, I don't agree with it. Fine. Jimmy@readingwithjim.com is where you can email me. It's fine. And remember, I'm not trying to destroy your appreciation of the fall of the House of Usher as a classic Gothic story. It's beautifully written. Beautiful. Scares the poop out of you when you're a kid. You read this to a child, it's going to scare the poop out of them, which is good, right? It's good to feel scared sometimes. But on another level, there is ample evidence, not what these critics said. Oh, there's incest going on. Bullshit. It's BS. This is a story, it's either a horror story or a crime story. I think. Because there's ample evidence that Roderick knew what he was doing when he sealed that tomb. And whether or not the narrator was involved in the plot, that he would, perhaps benefit somehow from getting rid of the only heir to the fortune. But the good news is that, fate moves in a different way, right? It just collapsed the whole house. And as the ending paragraph said, I fled aghast. When I first read that, of course he got out of there. because there were strange things happening in that house. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. So thank you so much. And if you would like a PDF of this, just let me know. I really enjoyed this story. Hope you did too. Come back, read some more of my stories. Email me at your convenience, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. See you soon.